What's going on, guys? We are back with Johnnyboi's Fusion Tournament, the wrap-up of the North America quarterfinals for 3s, 2s, and 1s. And what does that mean for teams? Who still has a chance to win the entire thing? Which teams are eliminated? Newsflash, there's a lot of teams already done. But let's get into it. Let's talk about it. So, some things to note for the prize pool. The bracket splits. Every single bracket, you're still playing for money. So even if you don't win the overall team, you're still playing for $1,500 for first, $1,000 for second, third, and fourth. They get $500. On the other side, you got for the overall standings, which is based on points, as you can see up here, first with 17, then second with 11, third and fourth with 7. You get money for that. So first place, $4,500, second, $3,000, third, $2,000, so on and so forth down the line. So let's get into it. We're going to come back to this about the points, but let's just see what happened so far throughout. So 3v3, probably the most predictable one. You have teams that generally you think will win, which would be RLCS teams, and guess what? They won them all. You got Space Station over Divine, pretty close. But Space Station comes up with the victory there. Then Affinity versus 72-piece. A reverse sweep. A best of 7 reverse sweep. That feels bad for 72-piece. But Affinity, they kind of wake up finally, and they get that win there. That is a huge win for them because they were my dark horses for these brackets when we talked about bracket predictions, because I thought all their matchups were winnable matchups. And this one was very surprising when I saw that it was 3-0-72. But they come back and win it, which was huge for them going into the overall team standings, which we'll talk about in a little sbit. Then you got Team Envy over Vision, a 4-2 victory there. Rather low scoring across the board there. And then Rogue over Stromboli, which pretty convincing victory across the board there. So that is what you have left for the semifinals. Now let's go over to the 2v2. Space Station, considered the best 2v2 squad. They get the win. A lot of people considered Rogue and Envy to be possibly number 2 and number 3. But they were seeded 4th and 5th based on what they did throughout the qualifiers. Rogue, they come out on top, and this one was huge because Rogue and Envy are on the same side of the bracket for every single one of these matches. So it really comes down to who was the better team when they would play off, and this one went Rogue's way, which was very, very important, and Envy, they lose there. Next up, you got Vision over the 72 pin connector squad. So this one I thought might have went the other way, but Vision pulls out the win there for their only trip to the semifinals. And then Affinity over Stromboli to make it back to the brackets once again. So far, Space Station, Rogue, and Affinity have made it to the semis in both. Vision and Team Envy were the other two that have made it so far once. Then you get into the 1v1s. First Killer, it looks rather close, but I heard this was kind of a mockery where First Killer was kind of just doing what he's got to do. First Killer, no surprise here to come out on top as that number 1 seed. Then you got Magic Bear, who is making a ton of fans throughout this tournament. Everyone wants to see what Magic Bear can do. A lot of people saying he could be the new best 1v1 player. Well, he gets the win over Reynolds, but Reynolds at least kept it interesting. But Affinity, once again, make it through. So Rogue and Affinity, the only 2 teams to make it through in every single one of these brackets. Then you got 72 Pin Connector over Stromboli in a very, very close one. Lion Blaze. Now, this one was a lot closer than a lot of people expected. I think a lot of people had Lion Blaze going really far. So in my YouTube comments as well, that a lot of people thought it'd be Lion Blaze versus First Killer in the finals. And then finally, my finalist with J-Russ, he comes in and gets the win here versus Kinsa. And he moves on to go to the semifinals as well. So Divine gets their 1 spot there. So 72 Pin Connector finally gets a spot here, and Divine. Now, what does this mean going forward? Now, there's a couple things here where the quarterfinals were the most important games, which we'll get into the point breakdown, which is kind of strange to me because the quarterfinal matches, 7 points right there worth. Now, obviously, there's a chance to earn more points, but for that match alone, 7-point difference. Then you go to the semis. It's only a 4-point difference at that point. And then for the finals, 1 less than 7, we get 6 points. So really, the quarterfinal matches, when we're looking at head-to-heads, and obviously they can earn more points throughout, but those were the most important matches in terms of point difference, which is kind of strange. Like, I think it would have maybe worked a little bit better being like 5 points, then 11 points, then what would be 18 points. That might have made a little bit more sense, but then a first would be better than coming in second and a third. So it's up to you how you decide how you would want that to play out. But that seems to me would make a little bit more sense. But that's not the case here. So what that does mean is that because a first place is not more than 3, 3rd, or 4ths, we already have teams that are out of it that are still in the brackets that cannot come in first. And that is a lot of teams. So let's go over here to our point standings. So Stromboli, 0 points. They will finish 8th no matter what. They didn't make any of these semifinals. But then you got Vision, Team Envy, Divine, and the 72-pin connector squad. Well, they all have 7 points. The most they can finish with is 17. So Affinity and Rogue, they cannot be passed by these teams. So the highest that these guys can finish, even if they get a first place finish, is 3rd place. That is the highest they can possibly go. So, I think that might be a little bit of a working point for maybe future tournaments of point systems of it kind of stinks that these teams are just completely gone. In the version of 5, 12, and 18 points, or 5, 11, and 18 points, then Rogue and Affinity would only be at 15, Space Station would be at 10. These guys would only be at 5, but they would have more room to grow, and there would still be a shot at a first place finish. Unless Affinity and Rogue were playing each other, which is very possible in one of these tournaments. But which, does that happen? Rogue and Affinity, yeah. So that wouldn't have mattered anyway. Technically, they still would have been eliminated, but more on a caveat. But anyway, we'll talk about who can win it, right? You got Space Station Gaming, and then Affinity and Rogue. And Affinity and Rogue, they obviously have the best case here. So Space Station, they have 2 chances left. They are both at 7 points. They can gain an extra 10 in each of these. So they can finish with 34 points total, while these guys can finish with a lot more points, 51 points total. But let's get into it. Space Station versus Affinity right here. They play Affinity, they play Rogue. They have to win both of these series for a chance at first place, because if they lose one of them, then they're down to only getting 10 extra points, and they would be at 24 points. And because Affinity and Rogue would gain 4 points, because they would win one of these, they would be at 25 points at that moment. So right there, Space Station has to win both to have a chance for first place. If that does happen, they still need some help. They would be at 24 points. These guys would be at 21, but one of these guys would be at 25 points at this point because they play one another in that final round. So a lot of important games across the board, but basically what it turns into is if Space Station does beat both of these teams, they really got to hope for Envy to win 3v3. They got to hope that things go their way. Rogue and Affinity very likely going to the finals here. And I think a lot of people, based on what's been happening, have whoever wins that winning the whole thing. But you never know in ones with how good everyone is. So they basically would want whoever wins this game to definitely lose in the finals to have the best shot possible. Well, let's say they win both, right? So they would be at 22 points, and then one of these squads would be at 25 points. So if that happens, they have to win one of their tournaments, and they have to hope that the teams also lose in the other ways. So they would hope that Affinity loses to Vision here. They would hope that Rogue loses to Team Envy, and that's the only way that they would be ahead of these teams. And did I say 14 or... I'm sorry, 24 points. So they would have 24 points, if I'm doing this right. Or maybe I'm doing this wrong, actually. Oh, wait, it's only 4 points to make it to the semis. Yeah, I'm sorry. So, yeah, they would be at 22 points. So, 22 points, and these guys would be at 25 points. So, that's a 3-point difference to make up. The only way they make that up is if they win and the other squads don't. That's literally it. And if that happens, they would get it. So, 6 points for a first place finish. So they would gain the increase there. So they would need, basically, so they win this one. If Rogue does win this, Rogue would be at 25. Space Station, once again, with both those wins, would be at 22. So there'd be a 3-point difference there. Space Station would have to beat Rogue to have a chance here, but at least they would play one another. In this case, they also have to beat Rogue. And then say Affinity wins. So if Affinity wins, then they move up as well. They would also be at 25 points. We'll get to that in a second. And then finally, in this bottom one, they just have to hope that the other team loses. So that is the main issue here, is if Space Station does everything right and they take these two out, even if they win both. So I think if they win both, they might clinch, but I have to do the math here real quick. So 7 points, they would get 10 points each for those. So they'd be at 34 points. Let's say the best case happens for the other squads. Rogue would be at 25, and then they would... Okay, yeah, so they cannot clinch. Space Station cannot clinch with the first place finish, because if Rogue does win this game and then loses to Space Station, if Rogue wins down here, Rogue takes the title by 1 point. They would be at 35 points compared to the 34 of Space Station. So that is where I find that might be a little bit strange to me, where like the team that wins 2 of the tournaments, they don't win the whole thing, but I guess it's not that bad if Rogue or Affinity wins this. But again, it's the same thing for Affinity. Like if Affinity makes the finals and then they also win down here, Space Station does not get the title. Now, Space Station will guarantee number 2 because Rogue and Affinity play each other right here. But they basically have to hope that the teams lose in these matches as well to have a shot. Or, obviously, for Rogue or Affinity to not win the 1v1. So that's where it comes down to, basically. A lot of big games going to be happening throughout the semifinals. Once again, Space Station, to stay alive in this tournament, they have to beat both Rogue and Affinity. Now, if that's not the case, then everything changes, right? Then it's just between Affinity and Rogue, and it really just comes down to how they do, right? In this matchup, obviously, this one's a huge swing, right? It's a 4-point swing, or really an 8-point swing, because one team gets 4, the other team doesn't. So really an 8-point swing. But they can still make that up, because obviously in the other ones, they're not playing one another. So if one wins and one loses, they make up those 4 points. So really it just comes down to however that works out between Affinity and Rogue. Once again, though, Space Station, even if they win both, then they would need Rogue or Affinity. Whoever wins the 1v1, if they do, they would have to lose the semifinal match before that. That's the only way Space Station would walk away with the win. Or lose, of course, the 1v1. So that's how it all plays out for the end here. It's a little bit confusing, but not too bad. So once again, we got 3 teams fighting for the spots. The rest of these teams, they're still alive, and they're still trying to get, that 4th place spot, or even that 3rd place spot. That is still possible, because if Space Station loses out, these guys can get 10 more points. They can pass Space Station. So if they get a win in one of their brackets and Space Station loses out, then they would take over Space Station's spot. If Space Station wins one of their semifinals, then these guys can't finish higher than 4th, any of these guys. So that's what they'd be fighting for. And obviously they're fighting against one another, but not really in the same brackets for the most part. The only time they do actually fight in the same bracket is down here, because Space Station didn't make this final. So you got the 72 Pin Connector versus Divine, so that one's a very important one. Whoever wins that is guaranteed to be above the opposite team there. So huge game there. But all across the board, it's huge games, right? We got $1,500 on the line for each of these matchups, so it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. So we'll do, I guess, really quick predictions once again. I think Space Station walks away with the win here. I do really like MV3's team, and I think that could be a surprise. I'm still looking at Affinity, though, man. Something special going on there. And this could be that Dark Horse team that takes it, but I got Space Station with the victory there. This one, I feel like it's a coin flip. Change Space Station Rogue. I had Envy beaten Rogue in a coin flip, but Rogue took that win there. I feel like Space Station hasn't really been tested. I'm actually going to give Rogue the win here. And I think I'm going to have Rogue move on. And I'll say Rogue wins this one as well. Rogue versus Affinity in the finals there. So we got Space Station over Rogue. I'm sorry, over Envy. Then you got Rogue over Affinity. And then finally, in the 1v1, I'm going to give my boy J-Rush. I'm saying he's making the finals. I said first killer would win, but screw it. Let's go J-Rush. He's going to win the whole thing. He's going to win over first killer there. So if that did happen, I think Rogue walks away with the win, though, anyway, across the entire board. Rogue would gain some points here. Affinity loses the points there. Yeah, so Rogue would walk away with the victory, because Rogue does 10 points better than Affinity in this one. I'm sorry, 4 points better in this one. In here, they also do better by 6, so that's a 10-point lead. And then finally here, I have Divine moving on. We'll say versus Magic Bear to make it interesting, because if Magic Bear would pull that out, like in my predictions, they would actually tie completely for first place. They would all have exactly the same amount of placements across the 3 games. So we'll see what happens. Or maybe not across the 3 games. I don't know. My math's getting screwy at this point, but we're just going to take it as it is. Thank you guys for watching. And if you haven't been watching, definitely tune in for Johnnyboi's channel. I believe it's going on all weekend as well for these semifinals and finals. And it's going to be really, really fun. So definitely check it out. Until next time, bye-bye.